Chapter 737. The smell of death became stronger. The underground part of the ruins of the god of death was relatively intact. It seemed that the underground space had been reserved for other purposes when it was first built. Most of the temples of the giant gods were the same. Soren's half-elf temple also had the same layout. The temple above the surface was just the tip of the iceberg. There were 3 larger floors below, each of which was reserved for certain purposes. For example, the interrogation room, the detention room, the prayer room, the confinement room, and so on. Many high-level spies from other forces who came to Mordor to wreak havoc were taken directly to the basement of the temple to be tortured by the Nightwalkers. Nightwalkers. The elite rogue order in the half-elf temple. There were only 16 members in total. All of them were above the high grade and had the ability to advance to the legendary level. They were all fanatics who were blessed by Soren. The gods had their own top force groups in their churches. The god of suffering had the broken monks, the god of mages had the council of mystics, the lady of night had the black moon monks, and the goddess of magic controlled the mysterious fire knights, the star hunters, the sons of Starfeather, and so on. Basically, most of the gods had their own top force groups inside their churches. Soren's foundation as a god was not very strong, so he had only formed a small group of Nightwalkers. This should be the interrogation room. After passing through the side corridor, it suddenly opened up a lot. There was an iron gate dug out nearby, which seemed to have been recently repaired. Soren saw some strange creatures. They were not like creatures on the surface, but more like monsters in the Underdark. There were trolls in the past, but he didn't know what terrible experiments the Lich had done here. Even the trolls, who could regenerate their heads after being cut off, were half dead. There was a trace of demonic breath in the room where the trolls were held. Soren glanced and saw a scarred berserk demon. The Lich was also close to the top undead in the multiverse. It seemed that it had also caught some demons from the bottomless abyss as experimental materials. The power of the berserk demon was amazing. Ordinary iron gates could not contain it at all, so there was an energy seal on the outer layer to imprison the demon. Further ahead was a large row of iron shelves, on which hung all kinds of torture instruments. There were dissected corpses on the table, ranging from humans, dwarves, and gnolls. Some of them were even preserved in huge glass bottles. This place looked similar to the cave Soren had entered for the first time in Amber City. There were even mummies nearby. Moving forward, there was another passageway. This was where the strong chaos mana came from. It seemed like the Lich Soren was looking for was down there. I have an idea. Soren quickly came up with an idea. He quietly retreated to his original position and drew his weapon. Then, he saw that the energy seal that imprisoned the berserk demon had been removed. Perhaps because he had been imprisoned and tortured for too long, the berserk demon didn't realize that he was free. A moment later, it hesitantly stretched out its palm and slammed it. Roar! After being tortured for a long time, the berserk demon couldn't get rid of its chaotic nature. It rushed out of the iron gate and broke through it along with the wall. Rumble. A violent muffled sound was heard. The nearby undead guards immediately took action and quickly rushed over. The berserk demon had been imprisoned for so long and was already burning with anger. It directly crashed into an undead guard and turned it into a pile of bones on the spot. Demons were naturally very challenging, and their attributes were far superior to other creatures. These undead guardians couldn't stop it at all. At the same time, in the lower level of the ruins, in front of a huge experiment table, the Lich who was conducting some kind of experiment raised its head. The Lich's expression was a little confused. As a high-level undead creature, the Lich had recently repaired its body. It was completely made up of bones, and it attached a layer of flesh to it. Although it was only for decoration and would break in a few years, it was still a piece of flesh. It put down some kind of black crystal in its hand, looked up, and murmured, "Did the demon escape? Is there a problem with the demon seal?" A berserk demon was nothing to a Lich of its level, but if it was allowed to go crazy, it could definitely mess up its laboratory. Therefore, it had to go up and deal with it now. Because there was still a trace of doubt in its heart, the Lich was very cautious. First, it blessed itself with a spell, and then walked towards the passage on the upper floor. It suspected that someone had sneaked into its lair. Rumble. There was another dull noise, and the figure of the Lich appeared on the upper floor of the laboratory. It didn't find any abnormalities, except for the berserk demon that ran out of nowhere. Bone prison. With a simple undead spell, the bones on the ground immediately flew up automatically and turned into a cage, trapping the berserk demon in place. Dominate demon. Another spell appeared, and the Lich in front of it planned to control it first and then lock it up again. It still needed to continue the experiment on this berserk demon. But at this moment, a strange light suddenly appeared, followed by a figure that rushed out from the side of it. Enemy. As a Lich that had just advanced to the level of a demigod, Trittendrick's reaction speed was also very fast. It almost didn't think about it and cast one of its most powerful spells. Time stop. As a high-level Lich that was close to immortality, it would not let down its guard against any enemy. A Lich of its level would usually start with the legendary spell, Time Stop, and many of them were directly triggered spells. High-grade wizards could master powerful Accident, which could automatically activate spells that they had memorized when certain conditions were met. If he advanced to the legendary realm and mastered special supreme magic skills, he could also master the legendary level, Greater Accident spell, which could instantly trigger spells of higher level and even legendary spells. Trittendrick's spell trigger condition was when he was attacked by the enemy. The faster his consciousness was, the faster the spell would be triggered. As a Lich with a long lifespan, Trittendrick's spell ability was far beyond other legendary spellcasters. And this level of supreme magic skill could be said that even Gloria and the Fallen which combined couldn't compare to this demigod Lich in front of him. Because as a demigod Lich, he could already include Time Stop in the scope of Greater Accident. Back then, who knew how many legendary adventurer teams had been annihilated by this ability? No surprise. The enemy who was about to sneak attack him was also stopped by Time Stop in an instant. At this time, Trittendrick slowly began to prepare the next spell. The duration of Time Stop was enough for him to throw out a lot of spells and kill the enemy in front of him. Chapter 738. Time Stop. This incomparably powerful legendary spell was the trump card of top-level wizards. For any ordinary creature, the legendary wizard who had the upper hand was almost guaranteed to win. During the time when Time Stop was in effect, it was enough for a legendary wizard who had mastered casting skills to throw out a large number of spells. For a demigod Lich like Trittendrick, spells below the fourth circle were almost instantaneous. If he wanted to, he could throw out dozens of spells in one go to blow the enemy into pieces. Soren was frozen in place. At least in the eyes of the demigod Lich in front of him, the legendary wanderer who had overestimated himself and tried to challenge him had somehow found his way into the death god's ruins had been fixed in place by his spell. And this time was enough for him to cast several instant death spells. With the rogue's poor immunity, Trittendrick didn't believe that the opponent could pass his instant death spell. As a powerful demigod Lich, Trittendrick's wizard level had reached 26. Even level 30 legendaries would find it difficult to escape from his instant death spells, let alone rogues. However, his long-term caution gave him an extra layer of insurance. He decided to use the spell Banshee's Howl to deal with the enemy in front of him. Legendary rogues were still able to dodge other spells. Soren was acting. After a long period of battle experience, he had finally stepped into the realm of acting, even though he only had a little bit of acting ability in the past. At this moment, not only did he really show the state of being affected by Time Stop, but his face and eyes also showed a lifelike panic. It looked like he really didn't expect to be hit by the demigod Lich's Time Stop spell. At this moment, he was in a state of panic. What a joke! As a true god who had mastered the divine title of a half-elf and a rogue, how could Soren be affected by the effect of Time Stop? Most of the demigods could be immune to the effect of Time Stop, let alone him. At this moment, it was all about acting. For a powerful enemy like the demigod Lich, Soren didn't make much of a difference if he attacked first or second because the opponent had too many spells to trigger. To deal with this kind of enemy, he could only catch them off guard. Banshee's Howl. Sound wave spells were the most difficult to successfully avoid, and Banshee's Howl was one of the most dangerous ones. The demigod lich in front of him obviously wanted to get rid of Soren once and for all, so he directly used his killer spell. However, what he didn't expect was that just when he thought that the legendary rogue in front of him had been frozen by him and could easily cast spells to kill him, a murderous intent suddenly appeared in Soren's eyes, followed by a little golden divine light. Soren's figure suddenly rushed in front of the demigod lich, and then a cold light slashed toward his head. Dang dang dang. The sudden attack forcibly interrupted the demigod lich's spell and caused his own magic to have a crazy backlash. As an advanced berserker and a demigod lich who mastered chaos magic, although Tridendrick always buffed himself with the spell, Chaos Shield, at this moment, he felt that he could no longer control his magic. Fortunately, all the protective spells that he had memorized with accident were triggered, and he forcibly opened an energy shield to protect himself. The storm-like attack came, and the energy shield only lasted for less than half a second. In an instant, Tridendrick realized that his enemy was not an ordinary person at all because ordinary people couldn't be immune to time stop, let alone break his energy shield so easily. The curved sword made a metallic sound on the demigod lich's body. A row of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes, activated Shadow Strike. You've caused 12 damage to the target. You've caused 3 shadow damage to the target. Activated Shadow Strike. You've caused 9 damage to the target. You've caused 3 shadow damage to the target. An unimaginably tough nut to crack. It was mentioned before that liches were high undead creatures, and they had incredible resistance to physical attacks. The demigod lich was even immune to 95% of physical attacks. Soren was now in a state of full power. Not only did he activate all his buffs, even the weapon in his hand was imbued with divine power. Even so, he could only deal around 10 points of damage. It was not hard to imagine that other legendary professions would only deal single-digit damage. The demigod lich's resistance to physical attacks was even higher than most deities. Moreover, the demigod lich's resistance to shadow energy was also very high. Soren's Shadow Strike could deal 18 points of additional damage, but now it only dealt 3 points of shadow damage. It was too horrible to look at. Facing Soren's storm-like attacks, the demigod lich had almost no chance of dodging. His agility and reaction speed couldn't be compared to a rogue like Soren, so he decisively chose the most effective tactic. Teleport away. The demigod lich immediately began to cast a short-distance teleportation spell at a speed that was close to instant casting. As long as there was enough distance, he had more than 100 ways to kill the enemy in front of him. However, the teleportation spell didn't work. Dimensional Lock, Divine Power Conversion. When facing an enemy like the demigod lich, how could Soren be reluctant to use his divine power? When he launched the attack, he had already used his divine power to activate the dimensional lock, directly blocking all teleportation spells within a 20-meter radius. Slaughter Transformation. Facing Soren's storm-like attacks, the demigod lich did not even show any signs of being heavily injured. At this time, Soren could only reveal his trump card and enter the Slaughterer form that he had not used for a long time. Crackle. Soren's bones cracked. Since he succeeded in becoming a god, the number of times Soren entered the Slaughter form could be counted on one hand. When he entered the Slaughter form, his appearance was completely different from that of a human. He looked like an evil god. The pressure of a god emerged. The demigod lich's face finally changed because at this time, he realized that the enemy he was facing was a true god. However, he had now missed the opportunity. Soren would never give the enemy any chance in battle. Divine Power Shockwave. Since it had already come to this point, Soren simply didn't hold back at all. At the moment when he transformed into the Slaughter form, the surging divine power value directly rushed out like a tide and turned into a terrible shockwave that hit the demigod lich in front of him. Divine Power Impact. This was holy damage that could ignore any resistance. P.S. From tomorrow onwards, the side story of the Queen of Succubus will be updated on the public account. The initial insertion point is the demon incarnation branch that was forced to be cut because it couldn't write more than holding hands. The side story will be updated one after another outside of the main story to make up for some missing parts of the plot, as well as part of the side story of the Queen of Succubus and the Fallen Witch. You can see it tomorrow on the public account. Chapter 739. The outcome of the battle had been decided. For a saint who was the incarnation of a god, a little chance was enough for Soren to erase any possibility of the enemy turning the tables. He would never give the demigod Lich any chance to escape. Therefore, when the divine power shockwave exploded, Soren launched a second wave of attacks. This time, he activated his epic divine power ability, and every attack he launched was imbued with his own divine power. This was the difference between a true god and a false god. Soren's divine power was able to completely suppress the demigod Lich's power. The power of the law of divinity was able to ignore all immunity tests, and it was able to inflict real damage on the demigod Lich's soul. Ah! The demigod Lich's soul screamed. As a high undead with powerful immunity, the Lich could no longer resist Soren's attack. With the rapid consumption of divine power, its body gradually shattered and collapsed, which meant that the body of the demigod Lich was completely dying. However, this alone wasn't enough. The demigod Lich kept his soul and a trace of life in his phylactery. Even if he was killed by a powerful enemy, he could still be restored through the phylactery. In this case, he would only be weakened for a short period of time before being revived. The demigod Lich was dead. However, Soren did not receive any slaughter EXP, which meant that the enemy was not completely dead. Slaughter Domain. A powerful domain was activated, and Soren's sight passed through the barrier of the spiritual realm. He then slashed at a distorted soul with his curved sword. Killing the body was not enough to kill the demigod Lich. Only by killing the soul could the enemy be completely defeated. No. The demigod Lich's soul was torn apart by Soren's sword. The power of divinity shrouded everything nearby, and the slaughter domain suppressed its soul, completely eliminating any possibility of it escaping. At the same time, as the demigod Lich's soul was killed by Soren, a crack suddenly appeared in an inconspicuous metal floating object in the astral plane, and then it instantly shattered. An intelligent and crazy demigod Lich. It threw its phylactery into the sea of the astral world. If it wasn't for Soren's slaughter domain, who would be able to find its phylactery in the vast astral world and kill it? I'm afraid. The only possibility was that there was a 1 in a billion chance in the astral world that some special situation would destroy this palm-sized phylactery that was extremely sturdy and enchanted with countless spells. Without a domain related to death, even if a deity wanted to kill a Lich, he would have to seal the space and completely destroy the soul. And to do so, one would need at least the strength of a mid-tier god. The Lich was completely dead. At this moment, a series of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Following that, countless soul fragments entered his body, and the divine light was gradually absorbed by Soren. A very small part of it was integrated into the divine artifact machete in his hand. It was not complete yet, but it still had the possibility of further growth. Kill demigod Lich. Extracting target's soul energy. You've gained 819,000 slaughter EXP. The target possesses divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've gained 5 divine points. The target possesses divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've gained 2 divine points. The first row of data continued to appear. However, it did not stop there. New data continued to appear below. The target possesses aura of fear. Extracting target's aura of fear. You've gained part of the information of the terror domain. You've mastered a new ability, aura of fear. The target possesses death divinity. Divinity compatibility 81%. Extracting target's remaining death divinity. You've gained part of the information of the terror domain. The real reward was yet to come. Soren could obtain the divinity and divine points provided by the demigod Lich through other channels. However, a legendary-level aura and a one-time information notification of the terror domain were not something that could be provided by other enemies. There really is the remaining power of the god of death here. Soren instantly understood many things. He also knew why the demigod Lich stayed here for decades. He must be trying to find a way to integrate the death divinity here. Ordinary creatures could not integrate with the death divinity. Undead creatures had a natural advantage in this aspect. Otherwise, only people like Soren who had mastered the terror domain related to death could do so. Killing itself originated from death. Aura of fear, deity's domain, you have mastered the power of fear. When activating the terror domain, all nearby enemies must go through a compulsory test of immunity. Otherwise, they will fall into all negative states caused by fear, such as panic, escape, tremble, surrender, and so on. The difficulty of the aura of immunity is determined by your profession level. Divinity can reduce or increase the chances of enemies passing the test of immunity. Aura of fear. This was a power that many powerful evil gods, demons, and devils could master. Almost every archdemon had the ability of aura of fear. They used fear to enslave their servants. Soren's aura of fear was obviously more powerful because he had a trace of the divinity of fear. After acquiring this powerful aura of fear, Soren's gaze of fear, divinity, seemed to have disappeared. The power of this aura of fear had been integrated into the aura of fear. The second aura of fear. Soren now had the evil aura and the aura of fear. Both of them had an area of effect and did not consume any energy. It was similar to the dragon aura of a high-level dragon. The aura of fear could only be activated when the saint form was activated. However, the aura of fear did not have any requirements. One is the evil aura, and the other is the aura of fear. Soren looked at the corpse of the demigod Lich and touched his chin. He murmured, "It seems that I have mastered the two auras of an evil god. I'm going further and further on the path of an evil god." The battle was over. Soren quickly cleaned up the battlefield. He did not have time to identify the things he found on the corpse of the demigod Lich. He then followed the passage to the lower level of the ruins. If he remembered correctly, there was a very powerful Thousand Souls leader here. He had to kill the Thousand Souls leader to completely clean up the ancient ruins. He was also very curious about what the demigod Lich was doing down there. Chapter 740. Soren cleaned up the battlefield quickly. The demigod Lich didn't have a lot of good stuff on him, only 3 legendary equipment. A tattered robe, a magic staff that increased spellcasting speed, and a somewhat familiar ring. Soren had no use for the first 2, so he could only bring them back to Gloria to see if they could repair them. The reason why the last ring looked familiar was that it looked similar to the Lich ring that Soren had obtained before, but the magic aura on it was stronger. The demigod Lich must have enchanted it with multiple spells. Other than that, there were only a few other things left. However, these weren't the only things that were valuable to Soren. He quickly entered the underground ruins and found himself in a huge laboratory. There were all kinds of glass bottles that contained many biological organs that would make one's scalp tingle. On the left was a large alchemy table, and on the right was a huge bookshelf. There were no signs of enemies, and the head of 1,000 souls didn't seem to be down there. It might be somewhere else in the underground ruins. Since he was already here, Soren naturally had to take the valuable things away. He only took a look at the table and lost interest. He only took a few valuable materials, such as mithril, and mithril. Damn! The demigod Lich must have gone to the Underdark to rob, because Soren found a fist-sized mithril on his table. This was half a year's worth of mithril in the Underdark. There were many other things, such as adamantine, gems, and dragon blood. Soren stuffed them all into his storage space. He would bring them back and let Gloria sort them out. Then, it was a mess of organs. Soren looked around and felt a little disgusted, so he only took a glass bottle that seemed to contain the Elder's Eye legendary beholder. The most important thing was at the bookshelf. The demigod lich wouldn't collect too many treasures. To him, power and knowledge were the most important things. Soren found a lot of spellbooks. There was even a spellbook that made Soren tremble a few times. He couldn't help but show a look of surprise on his face. Legendary book. This was a spellbook that recorded several legendary spells. Whoosh. Soren quickly turned a page. He glanced at the table of contents and saw the spell label. Time stop. Banshee's howl. Wish. Greater accident. Sword of destruction. Xenomorph. There were a total of 6 legendary spells in this book, which were all top-level spells that couldn't be mastered through conventional means in the current material plane. Some of them were not seen by Gloria and some of them were not even the demigod lich. Which meant that he couldn't master these legendary spells. Have the ability to use right now. These legendary spells have spells, lich. Time stop. Soren was very happy. He murmured, if I bring it back, Gloria can also learn this legendary spell, right? Speaking of time stop, Soren remembered a joke. There was an adventurer who said that if he could master time stop, the beautiful girls on the street wouldn't even know how they got pregnant. As soon as he finished speaking, his adventurer companion next to him looked at him with a strange, mournful look. The guy didn't seem to react. At this time, a witch in the team whispered, time stop lasts at most 30 seconds. Pada. When Soren picked up the legendary book, a book with a rather delicate cover fell next to it. Soren raised his hand and the book fell into his palm. After flipping it open and glancing at it, his face suddenly changed again. He even looked a little ecstatic and murmured, the Book of Arcana. This wasn't a magic book. It was written in a row of characters from the Arcane Empire. It was more like a profound thesis. If one could understand it, they would be able to master some special supreme magic skills. How to memorize legendary spells with greater accident. How to chain memory with accident. How to control the trigger conditions of accident. There were only 3 titles on the book, each with a chapter and a prologue. This wasn't a magic book, but the personal notes of a grand arcanist. Why were the spellcasters of the Arcane Empire so powerful? A large part of this was because they had mastered some special supreme magical techniques. The arcanists were also far more proficient in the application of unexpected spells than anyone could imagine in this era. Chain accident. This was one of the supreme magic skills of the arcanists. They would set special conditions to trigger the chain accident, which would eventually form a chain reaction. When encountering a powerful enemy, all the preparation work would be completed in an instant. In short, one would automatically cast a large number of protective spells when encountering an enemy, while the other would need to slowly cast spells after discovering the enemy. That was the difference. The value of the arcane book in front of him might be more amazing than the legendary book. Of course. This was for the legendary spellcasters. Anything else? After discovering so many valuable things in a row, Soren simply turned the entire bookshelf upside down. Who knew how much precious knowledge this lich had collected in his long life? Soren simply took it all away after reading the last few pages. In the future, Mordor would definitely need to build a large library, and these books would be used to fill the library. After going through it so carefully, Soren really found some good things. There were a little too many necromancy books, but he didn't want to release them because many of them were too evil. But there were also some very special spells. Soren actually found the long-lost Bigby chain palms in the demigod lich's library. It was not the famous Bigby 5 consecutive palms mentioned before, but an earlier version of a low-level spell. The lowest level of Bigby 5 consecutive palms was Bigby Palms, which was a level 5 spell, and the mastery requirement was still very high. What Soren found was another set of low-level palms for battle mages. They were Bigby's Assistance Palm, level 1 spell, Bigby's Tripping Palm, level 1 spell, Bigby's Assault Fist, level 2 spell, Bigby's Guardian Palm, level 2 spell, and Bigby's Interference Palm, level 3 spell. Unbelievable. Even Soren didn't expect that the demigod lich would have such a long-lost spell book. Why were there no battle mages now? It was because these low-level battle spells had all been lost. The entry level for battle mages was Bigby Palms of Protection. If you could use level 5 spells, why would you still want to be a battle mage? First become a level 5 mage, then advance to a battle mage, and learn close-range casting skills from the beginning. It was too stupid. P.S. The first chapter of the extra volume will be updated on the public account today. The plot starts from the disappearance of the succubus queen. It will be updated around 8 or 9 o'clock. The extra volume is about 100,000 to 150,000 words. Chapter 741. Mordor City, Port Area. A melodious bell suddenly came from the lighthouse, and then the bell gradually became faster. Then someone ran over from the dock and said excitedly, "Fish. Fish migration. This year's fish migration has begun. It's less than 50 kilometers away from Mordor City." This sound seemed to ignite the entire port area. Immediately, many people rushed over from all directions. After a few questions, a person dressed as a captain immediately shouted, "Call for help. Hurry up and get those drunkards out of the tavern for me. Prepare a big net. Gather people. I'm going to the sea temple now. We're going out to sea right away." The port area suddenly became lively. Even the city hall of Mordor City was busy. Many officials came to the port area. Even the navy stationed in Mordor City was mobilized. Battleships were replaced with giant nets, and then they began to gather sailors to go out to sea. Fish migration. This was one of the most spectacular scenes in Mordor City. It was also a harvest feast for coastal cities like Mordor City. The scale of overseas fish migration was simply incredible. Basically, it had reached the point where a fishing net could be thrown down and it would be too full to be dragged. In the face of the arrival of the fish migration, the sea temple moved very quickly. The priest in charge of the temple immediately realized that this was an opportunity to expand their faith. The Naga sirens rarely appeared in front of the mortals and temporarily built a small altar in the dock area. The sea goddess blessed the city and promised that there would be a good harvest for 3 years, so this time the scale of the fish migration was even larger. This even alarmed Gloria, who had just finished an experiment. With the skyrocketing population of Mordor City, the food rationing was naturally a little tight. Now was the spring planting season, which was a time of shortage. The price of food on the mainland soared. Although Mordor City had stocked up a lot of food, it was not suitable to buy from other places. Fly. Gloria waved her hand, signaling the officials who came to report to leave and let them handle this matter. Then, she flew into the air and flew towards the sea. The outer islands were dangerous. Even something like the migration of fishes required some powerhouses to oversee it. This was because a school of fish represented an abundance of food. This food was very likely to attract the deep-sea beasts to feast on it. This was a feast to be shared. If they were careless and provoked, these deep-sea beasts might attack the fleet. Ships set sail one after another. The navy of Mordor City was also moving quickly, while a group of officials in the city hall were biting their pens and thinking about how to formulate taxes. The rich catch was a blessing from the goddess of the ocean. This was a gift unique to the city of Mordor. It was certain that the fishing boats that went out to sea this time had a big harvest, but these harvests could not be given to those people. They had to pay the corresponding taxes. There had to be a certain level of taxation, or else it would cause dissatisfaction among the lower class. This was a test of their ability. Soren's philosophy was not to collect more taxes, but to exploit and oppress. There had to be some leftovers for the lower class. They had to come up with a tax plan that others could accept. The boundless sea. Gloria's figure quickly flew into the depths of the sea. Behind her were thousands of ships. Even some small boats were going out to sea, ready to make a fortune. Farther away, even the sky was covered with silver-white scales. These scales stretched for more than 10 kilometers. At this moment, they were gradually approaching the port of Mordor. This was not the length of the school of fish. What Gloria saw was only the width of the school of fish. When she flew higher, she immediately saw the endless silver-white scales spreading on the sea. Countless fish leaped out of the sea, reflecting brilliant light under the sun. This was a scene filled with shock and magnificence. Even Gloria could not help but be shocked. She had never seen such a spectacular scene. Waves were flying. Outside the school of fish were groups of sharks. They swam around endlessly. They could easily catch prey with a casual attack. These sharks would migrate with the school of fish. When this huge school of fish dispersed, they would stop this feast. Huge tentacles appeared in the sea on the right side. Giant octopuses lurked at the bottom of the sea and devoured fish crazily. This was the most relaxing time of the year for them. They could eat until they couldn't eat anymore. There are at least 5 deep-sea giant beasts. Gloria glanced around, and her expression gradually became serious. The deep-sea giant beasts would not move with the school of fish. They would ambush and eat where the school of fish passed by. As long as they were careful to avoid them, the sharks would not threaten the fleet of Mordor. Closer. Closer and closer. When the fleet saw the first batch of approaching fish, many sailors could not help but open their mouths in surprise. This was only the front part. On both sides of the ship, there were schools of fish swimming. From time to time, there were fish leaping out of the water. Nearby were dolphins that were eating their fill. They carefully distanced themselves from the ship. Farther away, some tiger sharks appeared. The lookout took a look with a monocular and shouted, "Shark Man! There are traces of Shark Man over there." The captain also looked at it, and then his expression gradually calmed down and said, "Don't panic. They are also here to hunt fish. These guys drive some prey from the school of fish to their territory every year." Hundreds of tiger sharks emerged from the sea. The Shark Man cautiously kept a sufficient distance from the city of Mordor, and then avoided the deep-sea giant beasts. They used the unique way of their race to separate apart from the left side of the school of fish, and then drove the school of fish away under the leadership of the priest. They used a special sound wave to guide the school of fish and directly took away tens of millions of fish. This kind of thing will continue to happen on the way of the migration of fish. Shark Man, dark-scaled Naga, tidal fishmen, Amazon warriors, and so on. Every race near the overseas area will enjoy a feast during the migration of fish. Cast the net. Cast the net. Idiot. Wait a minute. The silver-scaled fish behind are more valuable. Wait for their school to come over and cast the net. Angry roars rose one after another. Large nets were cast one after another, and the hold of the ship was almost emptied. Some small fishing boats had only cast the net 3 times, and they were completely full. They could only rush to the port, planning to unload the fish and come back a few more times. There were too many fish. Some of the half-grown boys could reach into the water and catch a stingray that weighed 3 to 5 pounds. It stretched for hundreds of miles. No one knew if it was because of the blessing of the sea goddess, but this year's fish migration could be said to be spectacular to the epic level. A net that was cast down would catch over 100 caddies of fish. In less than half an hour, many ships were completely unable to carry the fish. In the end, a large number of ships began to frantically return. The port area had already been cleared and a large amount of space had been opened up. The first ships to return directly used wooden buckets to carry the fish and threw them at the dock. The clerks of the port of Mordor were so happy that they couldn't close their mouths. They took pens and recorded quickly. Now there was no time to count what fish they had caught, so they could only carry it in piles. Suddenly, a clerk looked up at the sky over the city of Mordor, and then he opened his mouth wide with a shocked expression. He didn't even notice that the quill pen fell to the ground. A high-pitched dragon's roar sounded. A shadow dragon that had just reached adulthood rose into the air from somewhere in Motor City, then it flapped its huge dragon wings and flew high. The dragon's roar was mixed with a cheerful aura. It rushed towards the fish in the distance like crazy. It dived directly into the bottom of the sea, and then rushed out from the bottom of the sea. A gust of wind whistled. The figures of the Quetzalcoatlus also rose into the air. This was a feast for everyone. The Dragon Knights of Mordor City also released their mounts to let them have a good meal. Chapter 742. The harvest ceremony was still going on. In less than half a day, the port of Mordor City was full. All the oak barrels that could be collected had been used up, and they could only be piled up in the open space of the dock. The officials of Mordor City now had a headache about how to preserve these catches. In the end, they had no choice but to ask the priests and wizards of the temple to set up a magic circle to preserve them at a relatively low temperature. Later, there was no other way. They could only let the catch pile up and send people to mobilize salt to get a batch of salted fish first. There was a fishy smell over the entire port of Mordor. Now everyone could only endure the pain and happiness. After all, such a harvest opportunity only came once or twice a year. The Sea Temple was the big winner of this fish migration. For a long time, the Sea Temple had been suppressed by the Temple of Wealth in the competition of Port Mordor because their opponents were really much richer than them. But today, the situation was really reversed. The number of people sacrificed in the Sea Temple had skyrocketed. Many people ran to donate and pray to thank the sea goddess for her gift. Now thinking about the pale face of Priest Jean, the Naga siren priest who was in charge of the Sea Temple couldn't help laughing out loud. She was now ambitious. She was ready to take advantage of this opportunity to completely suppress the Temple of Wealth. Everything was still busy. However, after the huge school of fish passed about 10 kilometers outside the port of Mordor, it began to quietly change a little. The school of fish began to diverge. This time, the fish migration was not the same as in previous years. Most of the fish migrating in previous years were of a single species, and there would not be too many species of fish occasionally showing signs of convergence. But this time, there were almost all kinds of fish. It seemed that all the fish that would migrate during this period of time had passed through the city of Mordor. But after passing through the city of Mordor, these fish began to change. The fish at the front were divided into 3 groups. One group continued to migrate in the direction of the Amazon rainforest, another group moved towards the southern sea, and the last group continued to migrate in a straight line. All this seemed to be controlled by a great force, forcing them to pass by the city of Mordor. Then, these fish migrated according to their original route. Desert of Death, underground ruins. What happened in Mordor City was not enough for Gloria to send a magic message. What he was busy with now was to plunder the treasures of the demigod Lich. All the books had to be taken away. Take away all the valuable experimental tools, but leave behind the strange organs used for undead experiments. These things were too disgusting. It took Soren more than an hour to finish cleaning up. By then, more than half of the laboratory was empty. Where is the head of 1,000 souls? Soren stood in front of the experiment table and frowned. He muttered, "Is this thing not nearby?" Under normal circumstances, a legendary monster that was formed from a large number of twisted souls had a trace of divinity, and Soren would never complain about having too much divinity. Finding and killing the head of 1,000 souls was a very meaningful task. After Soren made sure that there was no head of 1,000 souls here, he decided to return to the next floor. In front of him was a strange soul boiler. Soren thought for a moment and used his divine power to seal the soul within. Then, he brought a sample back. This thing was often used by the evil gods to extract souls and then make powerful servants. He could take it back and study it a little. Many gods of death who were not strong enough would use this kind of boiler to extract excellent souls and finally turn these souls into their own servants because there were not enough powerful professionals in the church that served them. It was basically impossible for the gods of death to do everything by themselves. In the eyes of mortals, those who held huge scythes were the servants of death. Soren walked around the underground ruins and cleaned up a few skeletal undead along the way. Finally, he found a clue in a dark tunnel because he could faintly hear the mournful wailing of souls. It should be here. Soren carefully cast a spell on himself and then went into stealth. It was an empty hall. There were piles of bones in front of him, and there was a huge furnace in front of him. Or rather, it was a fireplace. There was no fuel in it, and there was only a pile of bones under it. Blue flames danced in it, and he could faintly hear the wails of countless undead. There was a large ceiling circle around the wall and a 9-pointed star circle on the ground. These should have been left by the demigod lich. Soul furnace? Soren took a look and determined what the thing in front of him was. This should be the legendary soul furnace. The head of 1,000 souls was inside. Soren could feel a strong undead aura. The demigod lich had sealed the soul furnace in some way and then constantly extracted the divine energy in it. This power may have come from the head of 1,000 souls, or it may have come from the soul furnace itself. I must break the seal first. Soren slashed the wall with his sword. As the ceiling circle was destroyed by the divine power, an ear-piercing scream sounded in an instant. Black gas filled the air. Countless ghostly flames ignited on the bones around and finally gathered in front of the soul furnace, turning into a twisted mass of countless undead with a vague humanoid outline. Head of 1,000 souls. When the head of 1,000 souls gathered, a row of data appeared crazily, affected by fear aura. Test of will passed. You are immune to the negative effects of this aura. Affected by chaotic aura. Test of immunity failed. Within the range of this aura, all your tests of immunity are reduced by 2 points. Head of 1,000 souls. As the name suggested, it was a monster formed by more than 1,000 souls. This kind of thing often had an extremely chaotic will. Even if there was a strong consciousness leading the body, it would also be affected by other souls. 2 aura realms. Soren's expression was a lot more dignified. In an instant, he activated his Shadow Realm and Slaughter Realm, and then mobilized his Divine Power Points to slash at it. Divine Power Points must not be saved. Soren had planned to temporarily use up all his Divine Power Points because the head of 1,000 souls was a creature between incorporeal and corporeal. In the face of any physical attack, there was a 50% chance of phase evasion. Any physical attack only had a 50% chance of hitting it. But this was not the most disgusting thing. What was more disgusting was that the head of 1,000 souls, as a collection of high-level wraiths, had extremely high resistance and immunity to any magic attack. It belonged to the kind of monster that had a very rare foundation of double resistance. Against this kind of monster, both physical attacks and magic attacks were not very effective. Only the power of a deity could cause real damage. Chapter 743. Sizzle. 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 The moment Soren and the head of 1,000 souls clashed, something unprecedented happened. Time had to stop here. First of all, after encountering the head of 1,000 souls, Soren first slashed at it, but because of the particularity of the head of 1,000 souls, its body directly transformed from a solid to a virtual body, and then it dodged. Then, Soren realized that this monster could not be defeated easily with normal physical attacks. This was because when he activated the slaughter domain, he added some divine power to his weapon and used it to attack the enemy. This time, the head of 1,000 souls could not dodge the attack with its half-spirit body. It screamed in pain as it was struck by Soren's sword. However, at this moment, something strange happened. Soren's sword landed on the head of 1,000 souls' body. While dealing damage to the enemy, a row of data appeared in front of his eyes. Target hit. You've dealt 36, plus 24 divine power, / damage to the target. Extracting soul energy from the target. You've received 3,600 slaughter EXP. Target hit. You've dealt 39, plus 24 divine power, / damage to the target. Extracting soul energy from the target. You've received 3,900 slaughter EXP. It was very strange. This was the first time Soren gained slaughter EXP by attacking without killing the enemy. Every time he struck, he would tear a part of the head of 1,000 souls' soul. This was because it was originally a monster formed from thousands of twisted souls. Soren's current situation was that he had not killed it yet, but every time he attacked it, he would gain some slaughter EXP, and then the death aura of the enemy would weaken a little. After slashing the target more than 10 times in a row, the aura of the Thousand Souls chieftain was not only getting weaker and weaker, but Soren also directly gained more than 30,000 slaughter EXP. What's going on? At this moment, even Soren himself did not understand. He thought to himself, is it because of the information I just received from the death domain? Domain ability. Although he hadn't fully grasped the power of the domain of death, some powerful domains could also increase his strength after obtaining the information once, resulting in some inconspicuous effects. This should be related to the information in the death domain, or maybe it was related to the slaughter domain. The battle was still going on. This unexpected discovery was not enough to make Soren panic. After activating his own ability, Soren relied on the powerful crushing power of the gods to not give the Thousand Souls chieftain any chance. He planned to use his divine power to get rid of this dangerous enemy. The head of a Thousand Souls aura became stronger. When Soren's final slash, the Thousand Souls' body of 1,000 souls wailed suddenly. And many souls rushed out of the head's body of 1,000 souls twisted body. S souls after souls body, S soul of 1,000 souls. Then. A's. Heads. Heads. A list. A. Head killed head. Head of 1,000 souls was killed. Extracting target's soul energy. You've received 75,000 slaughter EXP. Target has divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've received 4 divine points. Target has divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've received 2 divine points. The head of 1,000 souls last slash did not give much slaughter EXP. Maybe it had already absorbed part of the souls. However, the notifications didn't stop there. New notifications continued to appear below. Target has Spirit of Fear. Extracting target's Spirit of Fear. You've received part of the information in the Fear domain. Your new ability, Spirit of Fear, has been improved. Ability Breakthrough. You've mastered a new domain, Fear. Target has Divine Power of Death. Divine Power Compatibility 86%. Extracting target's remaining Divine Power of Death. You've received part of the information in the Death domain. Discovered Divine Power of Death. Divine Power Compatibility 89%. Extracting Divine Power of Death from the Soul Furnace. You've received part of the information in the Death domain. Ability Breakthrough. You've mastered a new domain, Death. Divine Power Awakened. Because you've mastered the Death domain, you've automatically mastered the Divine Power, Hand of Death. A series of densely packed notifications appeared. Soren's improvement from the head of 1,000 souls was much greater than the demigod Lich. He had absorbed part of the divine power of the Son of Fear. It could even be said that the Son of Fear was his first stepping stone. Now, from the demigod Lich and the head of 1,000 souls, these two monsters with Spirit of Fear, Soren had obtained the information in the Fear domain twice. Therefore, he directly mastered a new domain ability, Fear. Of course, this was not a big deal. What was more amazing was the information in the Death domain from the demigod Lich, and the other two from the head of 1,000 souls and the Soul Furnace. These three information notifications directly fulfilled the prerequisite to master the Death domain. Although it was only a basic mastery, for a god like Soren, it was enough to extend his Death domain with a type of divine power, Hand of Death. In simple words, this was a weakened version of the Life and Death domain. It could wipe out any mortal with strength below the legendary level. Any mortal. No matter if it was an elf, dwarf, human, demon, devil, or any other life form, as long as their strength did not exceed the legendary level, as long as they were still mortal, Soren could directly wipe out their lives. There was no immunity test. There was no need to trigger any immunity test. Even if the target's vitality was as tenacious as a giant dragon, Soren could wipe them out with just a thought. This was the terrifying part of the death domain. Of course, these were some of the most basic abilities. The domain was only the starting point of mastering the divine power. Soren's understanding of the death domain was probably not as good as the weakest death servant. This was because many death servants also had the death domain. The domain was only an extension of the legendary level. There was still a big gap between it and the real divine power. Chapter 744. With the death of the head of 1,000 souls, the energy on the soul furnace became mixed. The remaining energy was not needed by Soren. Because there were too many souls, his consciousness was too messy. This was an extremely impure energy. Perhaps it was very attractive to the demons of the chaotic camp, but to Soren, it was almost like poison. The divine energy had been completely devoured by him. The slaughter domain was so thirsty for the power of the gods that there was almost no possibility of leaving any behind. The ghostly flames that were burning around gradually extinguished. As the last bit of power left by the gods was absorbed by Soren, this place was really abandoned. An inconspicuous statue appeared in front of him. Soren glanced at it and confirmed its identity. This was indeed the temple of the King of Bones. Of course. If it was according to the old name, it should be one of the three gods of death, the former, King of the Dead, Weep Devil. The three gods of death were the god of murder, Baal, the King of the Dead, Weep Devil, and the god of strife, Banon. This was their name when they were still alive. After their death, their clergy was taken over by others, and their names became the god of slaughter, the King of Bones, and the god of tyranny. This was mainly to distinguish the new gods who took over their clergy later. For example, the King of the Dead, Clemvox, and the god of murder who was sealed and had gone crazy. A long time ago, there were three incomparably powerful humans. They were Bar, Devil Weep, and Ban-En. These three humans had challenged countless experts and climbed out of the gates of hell time and time again. They had even killed one of the 7 lost ancient gods, and each of them obtained a portion of the divine power. Finally, these mortals attracted the attention of a very powerful existence. It was the god of death, Jurgil, who was most likely to have the greater divine power. This ancient god of death was tired of his position. He divided his divine power into 3 parts and gave it to the 3 mortals who found him at that time, which later became the 3 gods of death. The most powerful axis of the gods of the evil camp. It was impossible to estimate how powerful the god of death, Jurgil, was because he was affected by the Avatar crisis. He was a little beyond the 3 realms and not in the 5 elements. He divided his priesthood and divine power into 3 parts, directly creating 3 incomparably powerful evil gods. Then, Jurgil retained his own divinity and helped the 3 gods of death to adapt to their own divinity and divine power. Later on, he even assisted the current King of the Dead, Clemvox. Even if death god Jurgil wasn't a greater divine power, Soren guessed that he wasn't far from it. Right now, the 3 gods of death had fallen one after another, and Jurgil seemed to have retired for some time. After all, the King of the Dead had gradually grasped his own divinity and work. However, the power he left behind did not disappear. The core power of massacre was still in the sealed body of the murder god, and the power of death was controlled by the King of the Dead. Although the Dread Lord had died, most of his power was still in the dread throne of the bottomless abyss. Interesting. The 2 previous Avatar crises, as the core that stirred the multiverse, were both related to the powerful forces left behind by death god Jurgil. His power was enough to create 3 great divine power gods. Death god Jurgil. There were very few legends about him, but many adventurers believed in a conspiracy theory that the Grim Reaper had given up his power not because he was tired of it, but because he was guarding against an even more terrifying existence. For example, another greater divine power god. There were very few ancient gods among the existing gods. Even Mother Earth and Father Oak were gods that were born in the material plane. In other words, there were only ancient gods of their level in the material plane. Before that, there were more ancient gods in the multiverse. There were still many empty places in the pantheon, such as the gods who created the material plane, the gods who fought against the first generation of demons, and the gods who created the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus. Note, creating a plane is the standard to measure a greater divine power. The multiverse was huge. Wandering in the astral world was too time-consuming for the gods, and there were many mysteries that even the gods were exploring. The three gods of death. Soren silently looked at the statue in front of him. To be honest, his relationship with the three gods of death was too deep, and it could even be said that they were tied together. He definitely inherited a trace of the bloodline of the god of massacre, and Vivian was the child of the Dread Lord. Now Soren gathered the domains of massacre, death, and fear. These three powers were the core domains of the three gods of death. Because of Vivian, Soren and the Dread Lord were irreconcilable enemies. Because of the bloodline of massacre, Soren and the god of massacre could not get along well. Now, among the successors of the three gods of death, only the king of the dead, who was relatively easy to get along with, had no hostile relationship with Soren for the time being. However, if he knew that Soren had close contact with the goddess of magic, his attitude would not be so good. Death, massacre, fear. Soren seemed to see the road ahead and the key to how to completely defeat the Dread Lord. He might even end the Avatar crisis, or at least greatly reduce the damage caused by the Avatar crisis. The Avatar crisis broke out. The power of the three gods of death would fall to the mortal world. The king of the dead fell in the middle of the Avatar crisis. Although the Dread Lord died, the throne of fear left in the bottomless abyss would not move. The time when the god of murder fell to the mortal world was uncertain, but it would not be much later than the other gods. As a result, Soren really had the opportunity to combine the three gods of death into one. Of course, it was impossible to do this with his own strength. It could even be said that there was not even a 1 in 10,000 chance. Soren needed more allies, more help, and more trump cards. Even, he might need a divine system as a backing to be able to fight against those powerful opponents who had mastered the three gods of death. Massacre, death, fear, evil, rule, pirates, shadow, plants. Soren silently looked at the realms he had mastered now. Except for the pirate realm and the plant realm, which were not very useful at the moment, all the other realms complemented each other. This was the foundation of his future promotion to a great divine power. But even if he was promoted to a great divine power, he would only have the same power as his opponent. Soren had to rely on the power of other great divine powers to defeat his opponent. He needed allies. At least strong allies with mid-level divine powers. Their relationship must be better than the current goddess of sea and the goddess of wealth, because these two goddesses could not help Soren against other gods at the moment. The goddess of magic may be able to help, but the premise was that she could survive this crisis of death. Chapter 745. The battle was basically over. Soren had obtained more than 1,300,000 slaughter EXP from this exploration of the ruins. Together with the slaughter EXP he had accumulated before, he now had a total of 1,600,000 slaughter EXP. There was nothing to think about. Soren's priority was still to level up as an arcanist because he had to reach level 17 as soon as possible. This way, he could use the power of the goddess of magic to resolve the conflict between arcanists and wizards. Once he reached level 17, he would be able to master the first level 9 spell slot. Since the destruction of the Arcane Empire, the boundary between level 9 spells and legendary spells had been blurred a lot. Although many spells were only level 9 spells, according to the standards of the material plane, they were called legendary spells. Soren was blessed by the goddess of magic, so after reaching level 17, he could use not only one level 9 spell slot, but 2. This was a huge improvement. Naturally, Soren had one more level 9 spell slot than others. The total number of spell slots that Soren had surpassed many wizards who were level 20 and above. A row of data appeared in front of his eyes. Arcanist profession increased to level 6. Received 34, INT 26 plus, INT 26 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 12, profession HP 4 plus, con 26 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Received 1 free attribute point. 1 more level. Soren silently looked at his attribute page. He still had 500,000 slaughter EXP left, but he needed 1,300,000 slaughter EXP to level up. Now that he was about to enter the ranks of advanced legendary professions, he would need more and more slaughter EXP in the future. If he wanted to fight against a greater god, he would need to reach level 35 and above. This was a huge amount of slaughter EXP. Conservatively speaking, he would need more than 30 million slaughter EXP. I'll be able to master level 9 spells soon. For a wizard, level 9 spells were a watershed. After mastering level 9 spells, one's combat power would be greatly increased. Moreover, level 9 spells such as Banshee's Howl and Meteor Burst could greatly make up for Soren's lack of AoE damage. Otherwise, if he were to rely on himself to kill his enemies one by one, he would be at a disadvantage if he were to encounter a large number of monsters, such as a sea of insects. Divine power points could be used for AoE attacks, but it wasn't easy to accumulate them. The priests who believed in Soren could not reduce the divine spells bestowed upon them, and the power of the kingdom of God could not be mobilized. Soren had to be very careful when it came to divine power. Furthermore, if it wasn't for his divine power points, Soren wouldn't have been able to win this battle so easily. Only those with divine power points could be considered gods. Without divine power, a god in the form of a saint would only be a slightly more powerful legendary figure. There was no need to think about the free attribute points. Soren directly allocated it to his dexterity. Now that his dexterity had reached an astonishing 35 points, if he could increase it to 40 points, his highest attribute would be enough to be on par with many mid-level divine power gods. As for increasing it to more than 45 points, it was impossible for him to think about it for the time being, because only greater divine power gods would have a main attribute as high as 45 points. Moreover, most of these gods relied on the power of divinity and the power of divinity. My divinity is now 85 points. My divinity is now 35 points. My divinity is close to mid-level divinity, but my divinity is now completely insufficient. There are many creatures with divinity, but there are still too few with divinity. I'm afraid that in the future, I'll have to kill gods to increase my divinity. How do those gods who have been sealed as gods for a long time increase their divinity? Soren's divinity was seriously insufficient. He didn't know if other gods were like this, but their divinity was far higher than their divinity. The chances of obtaining divinity in battle were relatively high, but the chances of obtaining divinity were very low. Usually, only special enemies could obtain divinity. The other gods had been sealed as gods for a long time, and with the help of time and the power of divinity, they had slowly made up for the shortcoming of divinity. However, Soren had only been sealed as a god for a short period of time, and now his divinity was almost twice as high as his divinity. With the death of the demigod Lich, the underground ruins were completely out of control. The skeletons that were under his control had now become wild monsters, and basically, they would take the initiative to attack any living thing they saw. Since Soren was already here, he planned to harvest these skeletons, which would at least give him tens of thousands of slaughter EXP. Soren didn't know if it was an illusion or not. He felt that after killing these skeletons, the slaughter EXP he obtained had increased by about 10% compared to when he first started. This increase wasn't very obvious. However, according to Soren's own calculations and his long-term experience, the slaughter EXP he obtained from killing skeletons had indeed increased, and the increase should be between 5% and 10%. Could it be because of the death domain? Soren couldn't help but fall into deep thought, and murmured, according to past inferences, as long as it's related to the soul, the slaughter EXP obtained can be increased. This is equivalent to increasing the ratio of absorbing soul energy, and it's said that under certain circumstances, the slaughter EXP obtained can be increased by an additional 20%. Without a doubt. The slaughter EXP obtained had indeed increased. Perhaps it would only increase by a few hundred points each time, but a little makes a mickle, and it shouldn't be underestimated. Soon. The monsters in the underground ruins were almost all cleared out by Soren. After killing all the skeletons, Soren did a little calculation, and was surprised to find that he had obtained about 100,000 slaughter EXP. If he had the chance to farm some more, it wouldn't take long for him to be able to learn a level 9 spell. Basically, there were no more monsters. Soren walked around the underground ruins, and finally confirmed that he had killed all the monsters. Then, he collected a little bit of gold and silver, and planned to leave the ruins of the God of Death. There were many ruins in the Eastern Kingdom. Although it was very dangerous, and some of them could even kill the gods, there were still many that could make Soren challenge them. He was going to go back and take a rest. Then, he would make his presence known to the girl named Alice. It would be best if he could gain some favorability and find a way to trick her back to Motor City. Then, Gloria would get the core knowledge about the Arcane Empire from her. He couldn't give up the Golem Legion. During the Arcane Empire, the mortals could challenge the gods because of the huge Golem Legion. Its scale could even be compared to the petitioners in the Kingdom of God. The great Arcanists could challenge the Kingdom of God during the Avatar Crisis because of the huge energy of the elemental fusion in the floating city and the large-scale Golem Legion. It was precisely because the energy of the floating city was comparable to a small kingdom of God that the gods were very afraid of the great Arcanists. Chapter 746. Soren quickly returned to the town. What made him feel a little regretful was that the girl named Alice, who he wanted to make her presence known, seemed to have left this place. This girl's status was very high. She probably only stayed in this place and wouldn't stay here on a regular basis. Moreover, this was just a very ordinary town. For a legendary level golem master, it wasn't very attractive. However, surprisingly, Soren managed to get some interesting information from the tavern dancer. It seemed that a divine artifact had appeared in the Eastern Kingdom. The flail. A legendary flail that was rumored to have the power to easily destroy other legendary level weapons. Currently, the entire Eastern Kingdom was in turmoil. Many forces were looking for and fighting for this divine artifact. However, no one knew where the divine artifact was. The only thing that could be confirmed was that a very powerful divine artifact had appeared. The flail? Soren couldn't help but be startled when he heard the news. This was because there were very few divine artifacts like the flail. The first thing that came to his mind was the broken part of the divine artifact that he had. Could it be the flail of time? The more Soren thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. This was because the flail of time was one of the most powerful divine artifacts in the material plane. It was also famous for its high armor penetration. It had a shocking destructive effect on any equipment below the divine artifact level. It was because the flail of time was too powerful that it was taken apart again and scattered all over the world. It wasn't strange for the flail of time to appear in the Eastern Kingdom. This was because the Eastern Kingdom used to be the core of the civilization. It can't really be the flail of time, right? Do you want to fight for it yourself? Soren couldn't help but fall into deep thought. The flail of time wasn't any weaker than the Holy Avenger. However, this weapon wasn't very suitable for Soren. Although he could use the flail of time with the help of omnipotent hands, it wasn't a suitable weapon for him. However, the flail of time was too powerful. It would be a pity to just give it up. Moreover, Soren already had a part of it. As long as the 3 parts of the flail of time were gathered, its combat power would surpass most ordinary divine artifacts. One shackled head was an elemental attack. Once the 3 parts of the chains of time were gathered, they would be able to attack with 3 different elements at the same time. Even a god couldn't defend against all of them. This godly item was famous for its amazing ability to break through defenses. If the attributes of all 5 heads were gathered, then the final age flail would be able to attack the enemy with 5 different attributes at the same time. Even against a legendary profession, the damage would be close to crushing. Soren had the tracking divinity. In theory, as long as he found traces related to the flail of time, he would be able to use the power of his priesthood to locate his target. During the Avatar crisis, divine artifacts were born one after another. If Soren had 2 shackled heads in his possession, he would only need to find one more to obtain a divine artifact of at least tier 3. This was a divine artifact. Even if it wasn't suitable for him, it would be a pity to give it up. She seemed to be unwilling to give up. After giving it some thought, Soren decided to pay attention to this matter first. The temporal flail was shockingly powerful, and it was the only divine weapon he had ever seen that was comparable to the Holy Avenger. If possible, it was better to think of a way to snatch it. Since Alice had left this place, Soren didn't need to stay here any longer. He could travel around the Eastern Kingdom to see if he could find any valuable relics that weren't life-threatening. At the same time, he also needed to pay attention to the news about the temporal flail. With so many people fighting for this divine artifact, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. Since there was still time, Soren also identified the ring on the demigod Lich's body. It was very surprising. It was also a divine artifact, but it was only the lowest tier 1 divine artifact. Item type, Gus ring, +1, item grade, tier 1 divine artifact, item description. This is a ring made by a famous demigod lich. Later on, it was enchanted by other liches. It is engraved with an extremely complex magic array. It can make the user immune to all poisons and diseases. At the same time, it can make the user immune to most charm spells and mind control spells. A special alchemy technique was used on this ring. It could strengthen the spellcaster's ability and increase their casting speed by 1 second when casting any spell. Requirements: none. Equipment effect 1, poison immunity. This ring has a special power. It can make the wearer immune to any poison attack. No matter if it's an alchemy poison, a natural poison, or a poison attack caused by magic, the wearer will be completely immune to the damage caused by them, as well as other negative statuses such as paralysis, rigidity, and so on. Equipment effect 2, disease immunity. This ring has a special power. It can make the wearer immune to any disease attack. No matter if it's a disease caused by magic or a disease infected by oneself, the wearer will not be affected in any way. Even the most terrible plague can't threaten the wearer of this ring. Any disease spells will be ineffective against the wearer. Equipment effect 3, immune to most charm and mind control spells. Equipment effect 4, increase casting speed by 1 point. Equipment effect 5, 1 additional level 6 spell slot, 1 additional level 7 spell slot, and 1 additional level 8 spell slot. Equipment effect 6, greater haste, can be used twice a day. Equipment effect 7, increase magic resistance by 10 points. Equipment effect 8, increase regenerative ability. Base HP recovery rate per hour +1. Equipment effect 9, defense level +2. Damn! After looking at the attributes of the Gus ring, Soren's expression suddenly became a little awkward. Most of the lich rings in this world were similar. In simple terms, the lich ring was a kind of enchantment alchemy process. There would be a big difference depending on the strength of the lich who made it. However, most of the basic abilities were similar. The +5 lich ring that Soren obtained before had a curse effect. It had a lot of similar abilities as the Gus ring. However, the Gus ring was more powerful. It didn't have a curse effect, nor would it reduce constitution. It also increased the number of times he could use greater haste, and had an additional level 8 spell slot. Other than that, there weren't any other differences. This was basically the +5 version of the lich ring. Because of the power of divinity, the effect was much better. Forget it. It increased my casting speed by 1 point, as well as a level 6 spell slot, a level 7 spell slot, and a level 8 spell slot. If I add the blessing of the goddess of magic, my spell slots should be more than a legendary wizard, right? The effect was quite good. Soren directly equipped the ring. As a divine artifact that provided additional spell slots, the overlapping effect of the ring was ineffective. This was because it was an energy deflection force field. It couldn't be stacked on two at the same time. Poison, disease, charm, and other abilities were also useless. Soren wasn't afraid of these things at all. Fortunately, the additional spell casting speed and magic resistance were useful. If he had better equipment in the future, he would consider giving it to Gloria and the others. Chapter 747. Report. 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 The sound of hurried footsteps could be heard. Then, a young boy rushed into the room in a panic, scaring the ugly monkey who was learning the common language. He looked up at the boy in front of him and glared at him angrily. Because the boy's father had helped him before, Ugly Monkey was too embarrassed to scold him too much. He could only scold him, "Why are you in such a hurry? What about your usual training? Are you going to be like this in the future? You don't have any professional qualities of a rogue." Among the professions, being a rogue tested one's psychological quality the most, because good rogues were active in the front line, reconnaissance, assassination, exploration, and were born with short weapons in close combat. The professional characteristics of a rogue determined that they would encounter more dangerous things than other professions. A long time had passed in the blink of an eye. After Ugly Monkey graduated from the training camp of the Temple of Light, he began to lead a few disciples to teach the skills of a rogue. Although he was less than 20 years old today, Ugly Monkey spoke like an old man. He had high prestige among the younger generation of Mordor City. He was a rogue who was very likely to enter the realm of legends in Mordor City. Even the absolute ruler of Mordor City, His Excellency Soren, knew his name. Ugly Monkey scolded a few words, and the young man in front of him blushed. After all, he was only 16 or 17 years old, and his psychological quality was not good enough. Ugly Monkey looked at him and sighed, then closed the book in his hand and said slowly, "What happened? Why are you in such a hurry?" After that, his face did not look very good, but it was not all because of the disciple in front of him. The disciple he taught was not good. At most, he would be laughed at by opponents of the same level. He could also say that the disciple's aptitude was not good. However, the higher-ups of Mordor City seemed to have lost their minds recently. They actually ordered all the leaders to start learning how to read and write. This was simply asking for his life. Now many old people in the management of Mordor City were complaining, especially those pirate leaders who could not read. They were so mad that they wanted to pull out their swords and cut people. But this was ordered by the mistress of Mordor City, Her Excellency Gloria. They had no choice but to memorize it because soon, the officials of the city hall would be responsible for assessing them. Although Ugly Monkey was very talented as a rogue, learning how to read was a little difficult. He did not have much talent in this area. When he thought about how he might fail the next exam, his face turned pale. Mordor City was ready to screen out better management. The most basic prerequisite for all of this was that these managers who might be promoted had to at least be able to read and write the common language. The reform of Mordor City was comprehensive. Now, many managers were under a lot of pressure. Many people felt that they could not keep up with the development of Mordor City. The current situation was that even the giant, who hated reading and writing, was forced to hire a teacher to teach him how to read and write. That was because Her Excellency Gloria's request for him was to at least learn how to write his own name, as well as understand commonly used sentences. However, these were all orders from Sir Soren. Because Sir Soren himself was the most powerful rogue in the material plane, the requirements for rogues in the city of Mordor were higher. In addition to learning to read, the Ugly Monkey also had to learn arithmetic. "Go ahead." Ugly Monkey threw the book aside and said slowly, "What happened?" The young boy was still a little nervous, but he was much better. He quickly searched his body and handed over a small note that was sent back from the front. He stammered, "Fight. They're fighting. The surface elves and the drows are fighting." Ugly Monkey's gaze froze when he heard this. Although he was young, his hands were stained with blood. Recently, he had begun to take charge of the secret organization in the Wind Spear Hills. He had a powerful aura around him. Instantly, the young man in front of him was so scared that he did not even dare to breathe loudly. Ugly Monkey quickly glanced at the note, then said in a deep voice, "Send someone to the temple immediately. Pass down my order. Send a team to the spider forest to collect more detailed information. Forget it. It's a big deal. I'll go to the temple to see the Archbishop myself. Also, you go and inform Lady Adele Isabella. The war between the drows and the surface elves will definitely affect a lot of places. Let her be prepared in advance." The movements of the elves were personally ordered by Sir Soren to pay attention to. Ugly Monkey did not dare to be careless about this kind of thing. He rushed directly to the temple area and prepared to send the news back to Mordor through the temple. During this time, the movements of the elves had been strange. Although the outside world was not very clear about the reason, many people had noticed this. The news was sent back overnight. Just the afternoon before yesterday, there was a big battle near the spider forest. For thousands of years, the struggle between the surface elves and the drows had not stopped, but most of them were small-scale battles. Maybe the surface elves intended to clean up the drows, or maybe the drows were going to capture some surface elves to please the Queen of Spiders. Such things were very common. But the scale this time was a little scary. According to the information sent back from the outside, the army of the drows this time had reached more than 3,000 people. 3,000 people. That was the army of the Underdark, not the motley crew of the surface world. This was almost equivalent to the main army of an underground city in the Underdark. Even a large drow family could not put together such a large army. It would take at least several drows working together to form such a large army. Moreover, according to the information sent back by the spies, even the petrifying lizard knights were dispatched in this battle, leaving a lot of broken human-shaped stones in the place where they fought. Only the petrifying lizards of the Underdark could leave such traces. A fight broke out. It was not a small-scale conflict, but a real war. The spies of Mordor could not enter the Underdark, and it was too dangerous under the Underdark. The drows retreated to the underground world after the battle, and there was no winner between the two sides. The drows did not seem to be at a disadvantage. Judging from the traces, they seemed to have the upper hand. The news must be sent back to Mordor immediately. The surface elves and the drows fought head-on. This was already a large-scale war that affected both races. Even an idiot could realize that this matter would have a profound impact on the whole world. The army of the Underdark was famous for its excellent equipment. If it wasn't for the fact that the metal of the Underdark couldn't be exposed to the sun. The drows had an absolute advantage in equipment. Chapter 748. The news was quickly sent to the city of Mordor through special channels. When the news was sent to Soren by magic, it was already noon the next day. At this time, Soren had already left the first town and arrived at a large city near the Gobi. This city was very old. Although it had been destroyed many times in history, it was finally rebuilt by the monks. Because this was an important stronghold for the monks, it was also one of the few places in the material plane where one could learn the sun flame style by conventional means. In the past, many adventurers who advanced to the monk level went here to practice, so that they could master the sun flame style and moon style after advancing to the legendary level. Soren's purpose here was to learn the expeditious steps. It was a special combat skill. After mastering it, one could get the additional ability of attack +2 and dodge +1. The eastern countries had a unique culture. On the other side of the continent, although the ability attack first could be trained, the actual combat effect was not as good as the footwork of the eastern countries. Soren definitely could not learn the sun flame style and the moon style. Unless he planned to advance to the monk level and upgrade to the legendary level. However, some of the unique training methods of the monks could be mastered. The expeditious steps was also one of the special abilities. Other than that, in the eastern countries, one could also train additional abilities such as rapid strike, sword draw, swift movement, and so on. This city was spoken in an Oriental language, and its name could be translated as the Boat of the Desert. This was the gathering place of the good and neutral monks of the order. They had been guarding the underground ruins where ancient evil creatures were sealed for generations. Because the teachings of the monks were quite special, there were many ascetic monks who had made a poverty oath here. They could almost be said to have no desire for material things. They were completely in pursuit of spiritual detachment. The population of this city was only about 50,000. Most of the cities in the eastern countries did not have a large population. Only near the fertile areas, there would be cities with more than 100,000 people. There were 3 monasteries in the ship of the desert. As soon as Soren arrived, he saw a group of dwarves. It was rare to see a bearded dwarf in the eastern kingdoms. Because the monk group of the desert boat accepted dwarves as monks, there was a special group of dwarven monks here. The dwarven monks with thick skin specialized in the diamond body. In the eastern kingdom, they were the best meat shields. In the south of the city, there was a smithy called Broken Sword. This was one of the reasons why Soren was here, as there were many good things in this smithy. Opposite the blacksmith shop was a tavern. Standing at the door, one could see lazy dancers lying on the counter. This city didn't allow the establishment of brothels. Even the Eastern Empress wouldn't touch that bad luck. This was because the martial monks here were very strict. Many of them were the kind that didn't leave overnight wealth. If they brazenly opened a brothel here, it would be a slap in the face. As for whether there were any sexual activities going on in the dark corners, the martial monks' conclave wouldn't ask too much. After all, they couldn't ask ordinary people to strictly follow the teachings like the monks. The owner of the Broken Sword smithy was not eye-catching. He was just an ordinary middle-aged man. He looked quite strong. Usually, he would just forge and drink. There were a few blacksmith apprentices under him. If Soren hadn't seen him in action before, he wouldn't have believed that this ordinary-looking middle-aged man was a high-level sword saint. "Sir, what would you like to order?" The middle-aged man in the smithy glanced at Soren and seemed to be uninterested. He said lazily, "We have all kinds of weapons here. If you need a different kind of weapon, you can customize it. But the price is more expensive." There were many different kinds of weapons in the Eastern Kingdom. Some monks even used scythes as weapons. They looked a little like the Grim Reaper's scythe. Many monks chose to fight with their bare hands, so the business of the smithy wasn't very good. Soren couldn't stay in the Eastern Kingdom for too long because the second wave of the Abyss demons would soon arrive. So he went straight to the point and said, "I heard that you have some underground relics here. Do you want to sell them?" "I want to pick a few." The middle-aged man couldn't help but squint. He looked at Soren up and down and said, "Follow me." Creak. The middle-aged man walked into the room and opened a door. Then, the entrance to the basement appeared in front of them. Soren quickly followed him. The basement was very spacious. On the left side were rows of weapon racks. On the right side, it looked more like a garbage dump because there were all kinds of strange things. He was a sword saint from the lawful evil faction. His secret identity was the leader of a grey organization. Their organization often went against the rules to find treasures in underground relics that weren't allowed to enter. So it was possible to find some rare and good things here. Many underground relics had terrifying monsters sealed. The monks didn't like adventurers to disturb places where ancient evil creatures were sealed. However, many places where evil creatures were found were ruins of the arcane empire. There were a lot of valuable things in those places. So, some organizations would secretly explore those places. The monks couldn't do anything about it. Sometimes, they had to clean up the mess for them. For example, recently, some bastard opened the seal of the relics and several magic sunflowers came out of the underground relics. Soren glanced at the items and started to look for something. With the advantage of foresight, Soren could find some good things in advance. However, with his current identity as a god, it was difficult to attract Soren's attention unless it was valuable enough. Soon, Soren found a broken mask from the garbage. The mask was made of bone and looked a little bit ferocious. The surface was severely damaged, but there was still some magic light left. "How much is this?" Soren picked up the mask and weighed it in his hand. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes and looked at it carefully. Then, he said in a deep voice, 3,000 Kindler. What a ridiculous price. In the middle-aged man's mind, the mask was naturally not worth so much money. However, Soren didn't care. He directly took it, paid the bill, and left. He came here for this mask. Now that the mask was in his hand, Soren directly left the blacksmith shop. He was going to buy the book to learn expeditious steps from the black market. This mask was a legendary item. However, now that it was seriously damaged, it was quite troublesome to repair. A legendary item was not enough to make Soren come here in person. What was more valuable was the spell imprinted on the mask. Simulacrum, level 8 spell. Of course. If it was called simulacrum, it didn't sound like much. If it was called a temporary version of avatar, it would be much more cool. Chapter 749. Soren only stayed here for half a day. After he got the item, he immediately began to track down the news of the birth of the artifact. He wanted to see if the artifact was the legendary Flail of Time. He could study the books about expeditious steps back in Mordor. However, Soren carefully observed the special mask for a long time because the spell engraved on it was really important. Wizards had an avatar-type spell. This spell was called Projection. It was a level 7 spell. After using it, a temporary avatar could be created. Depending on the mastery of the spell, the avatar could have about 50% to 60% of the power of the original body. In the case of using the projection spell, the original body could hardly move, and the consciousness would be transferred to controlling the avatar. Therefore, wizards rarely used this spell. Only when they were exploring some other planes would they send their avatars there. This spell had a lot of drawbacks, so wizards didn't use it much. However, this type of spell also had a black technology, which was a more advanced version of simulacrum. It could create an avatar that was exactly the same as the original body, retaining about 70% of the power of the original body. Moreover, this avatar could use some of the low-level spells in his memory. Soren's purpose was to obtain the simulacrum spell engraved on it. It was a spell that was almost lost, and it was the most powerful level 8 spell so far. Simulacrum had no casting restrictions. After creating a temporary avatar, the original body could also freely walk and cast spells, but the consciousness had to control both bodies at the same time. In other words, one had to do two things at once. This spell was very difficult to learn. At least wizards who didn't have enough brain power couldn't master this spell at all. Simulacrum was used on a large scale during the Oroqui Empire. Because the great arcanists had too many things to deal with, their original body couldn't spare time. Therefore, they began to study simulacrum in depth and applied it in many aspects, including some temporary projection spells. This was actually the domain of the gods, because the avatars of the gods had similar abilities. They also retained part of the original body's power and could use the original body's spells. During the Arcane Empire, the great arcanists who focused on research basically used simulacrum to deal with many things. You might see a great arcanist temporarily teaching a class in the academy, but in fact, his original body was still working in a laboratory. Those who could become arcanists were all people with outstanding intelligence. At the very least, they had the potential to become excellent scientists. The calculation and processing ability of the brain was amazing, and the speed of mental calculation was faster than other people using computers. This was the key to whether one could master simulacrum or not. If the calculation ability of the brain, controlling both the original body and the avatar, things would become messy. Soren definitely had the ability to create avatars. But to use this kind of ability from the perspective of a god, the price to pay was too high. The avatar was already. Unlike the avatar created by Soren, the avatar created by simulacrum was temporary, which meant that it would only take effect for the duration of the spell. When the spell's duration was up, the avatar would automatically disappear. The avatar crisis broke out. The things that Soren needed to deal with also increased on a large scale. Simulacrum was not only an advantage for him in battle, but it could also help him solve a lot of problems. Some of them were not so important that he needed to deal with them personally, but he couldn't completely ignore them. At this time, simulacrum was much easier. Soren directly cast a spell to create an avatar to deal with the problem. After dealing with the problem, the avatar would automatically disappear. Simulacrum created a temporary body, and the control was still the responsibility of the original body's consciousness. Note, the avatar created by simulacrum has the strength equivalent to 50% of the original body's slaughter EXP. That is to say, the avatar created by simulacrum has the same level as the original body's slaughter EXP. The higher the level of a wizard, the more slaughter EXP they need, and the more slaughter EXP they will have with simulacrum. If a wizard above level 30 uses simulacrum, then 50% of the slaughter EXP would be enough to create an avatar with the level of a wizard close to level 20. Under the night sky. Soren sat by the campfire and carefully interpreted the bone mask in front of him. There were countless extremely small spell circuits engraved on it. This was a supreme magic skill that was very difficult to master in this era. To enchant a level 8 spell on a piece of equipment, the number of basic skills needed to do this was a little too high. The spell circuits formed by simulacrum were more complicated than any spell that Soren had seen so far. Even legendary spells didn't have so many spell circuits. If simply using the amount of data, the number of spell circuits needed to form a level 8 simulacrum spell was about twice that of a legendary spell. However, Soren also had his own advantages, that was, he was a god. This not only meant that his ability to understand was far beyond the understanding of mortals, but it also meant that he had mastered and used avatars. The avatar of a god was a natural ability. Under normal circumstances, Soren could automatically master the avatar ability in his divine form. When he needed to deal with material matters in his divine kingdom, he could create an avatar that had about 80% of his original power. If he finished dealing with the matter, the avatar could directly disappear. Soren was now trying to use his natural ability to decipher the simulacrum spell in front of him. The great arcanists had always been studying the power of gods, and because of this, they were feared by the gods. Although Soren hadn't fully understood the structure of simulacrum, he could feel that this spell already involved the realm of gods. The purpose of this spell was to simulate the avatar ability of gods. To simulate the power of gods from a mortal's point of view. Soren studied it for a whole night. The more he studied, the more he was amazed by the wisdom of the great arcanists. It was like an ordinary scientist looking up to a scientist at the level of Einstein. The wisdom of these great arcanists was simply amazing. Even from the perspective of gods, Soren couldn't deny that these great arcanists were even better than gods in some areas. Looks like I still need Gloria's help. The sky was already bright. Soren put away the mask in his hand. There were too many complicated spell circuits on it, and it was impossible for him to decipher it in a short period of time by himself. Gloria and the Fallen Witch had to work together to help. Otherwise, who knew how long it would take Soren to decipher the spell? Chapter 750. Fu Tu caught a cold. The extra chapter will be updated the day after tomorrow. Passing through a barren Gobi area. The land in front of them had a trace of green, and the soil here began to become fertile. Along the way, there were also some figures of droll. They were the high-ranking droll who pursued the way of nature. Because the father of the oak chose to sacrifice himself to save the natural environment at the cost of his own great divine power, every year there would be some droll who were about to enter the realm of legends coming to the Eastern Kingdom to travel. The Eastern Kingdom was deeply influenced by the way of nature, so many times you would meet some legendary professions in the Eastern Kingdom who pursued the ancient unity of nature. Among these legendary professions, some were ordinary people who were inspired by the divine power left behind by the father of the oak. They pursued the balance between nature and humans. Many people with lofty ideals tried to save the land affected and destroyed by the desert of death, to gradually restore the damaged natural environment of the Eastern Kingdom. The collision of civilizations formed a new extension. On the other side of the continent, the Droll Order did not see eye to eye with many organizations, thinking that they were endlessly plundering natural resources, destroying the environment and balance of nature. However, in the Eastern Kingdom where the natural environment had been severely damaged, the relationship between the Droll and the monks was quite harmonious. The way of nature pursued by the Droll and the unity of nature pursued by the monks were very similar. Both belonged to professions that pursued the spiritual over the material. Passing through the Gobi area was a stretch of oak forest that stretched for dozens of miles. Every tree here was artificially planted. They were trees that were cultivated with magic, and were also a line of defense to prevent the chaotic energy of the desert of death from eroding the outside world. A long, long time ago. After the great destruction of the Arcane Empire, the Droll who came out from the damaged material plane began to travel the world. These Droll left footprints all over the world, trying their best to repair and eliminate the damage to the material plane caused by the fall of the Arcane Empire. At that time, it had been hundreds of years since the destruction of the Arcane Empire. This period of time was a dark period for all races in the material plane, because the sky of the material plane was gray for decades. It wasn't until Father Oak's divine power rose into the sky that the dust that covered the sky all year round finally disappeared. This part was recorded in Droll's canon. Father Oak exhausted all of his power and sought help from the four main elemental gods and the god of light. Finally, after a long time, the entire sky returned to light. Note, Nature Canon, Volume 6. Back then. The first legendary Droll to travel to the Eastern Kingdoms had passed through the Desert of Death. At that time, the Gobi region had yet to take shape. The Gobi that Soren had passed through was still a violent desert of death. The legendary Droll established a relationship with the remaining humans and civilizations of the Eastern Kingdom for the first time after the great destruction brought about by the Arcane Empire. Then, he settled down in the Eastern Kingdom. That was when the relationship between the monks and the Droll began. The legendary Droll was determined to restore the natural environment of the Eastern Kingdom. At that time, he had a very high reputation in the Eastern Kingdom. There were even many monks who followed him to train. The nearby monasteries called the White Cloud Sect and the Nature Sect were the monasteries that were passed down by the monks. They pursued the highest level of the ethereal body. Simply put, it was an ability that was similar to the unity of man and nature. It was also at that time. The Droll who came from the other side of the continent planted an oak tree for the first time. At that time, there was no way to grow plants on this land. The oak tree planted by the Droll had to be maintained with his own mana. That was the beginning of the oak forest. From then on, Droll and other professions began to come to the Eastern Kingdom. Wizards had also explored the Eastern Kingdom before. However, after discovering that the chaotic energy here greatly affected their spellcasting abilities, and that they couldn't even cast spells in some places, the wizards rarely set foot on this land. Some traditions began to appear in the Eastern Kingdom. For example, the oak forest in front of them. Every high-grade Droll who reached the Eastern Kingdom would plant an oak tree here. They would travel in this land for a long time, looking for a balance between nature and human beings from the monks and others. They would use this to trace the footsteps of the Droll ancestors, hoping to understand their thoughts at that time and enter the realm of the legendary Droll. Since then, there were more and more oak trees here, and finally, it became the oak forest of today. It became a barrier in the Eastern Kingdom, blocking the sand and chaotic energy from the Desert of Death. Therefore, the land in front was gradually transformed to be suitable for human habitation. Therefore, this oak forest in the Eastern Kingdom was equivalent to a sacred place for the Droll. As for why many Droll liked to travel to the Eastern Kingdom, there were some small secrets that were revealed by some adventurers. After all, the legendary Droll could advance anywhere. There was no need to go to the Eastern Kingdom. On the other side of the continent, there were many Droll who had not been to the Eastern Kingdom but had advanced to legendary. This reason was the Droll who had advanced to legendary in the Eastern Kingdom. It was possible that when they reached a certain threshold, their spirit would come into contact with a supreme existence and will. Then, this will would reward them with a glimpse of the most real secrets of nature, and from there, they would comprehend the powerful, nature, domain. That's right. It was the nature domain. A domain that was a godly buff for the droll. A legendary droll who had just comprehended the nature domain could easily defeat an advanced legendary droll who was more than 5 levels higher than himself. Soren suspected that this will was the father of the oak. Because other than the father of the oak, who else could give the droll such a powerful nature domain? He was the embodiment of nature. Soren guessed that the father of the oak did not completely die after exhausting all of its divine power. Instead, it merged with nature in another way. In layman's terms, the father of the oak had already merged with the physical body. It gave up the self-consciousness of a god and became a subconscious existence of nature. Moreover, the supreme will that the druid spoke of could be sensed by the warrior monks of certain factions in the Eastern Kingdom. After reaching a state similar to the unity of man and nature, the warrior monks in the Eastern Kingdom could have simple contact with this supreme will. Some of the warrior monks could evolve their ethereal body into the powerful, vitreous body. Chapter 751. There was a wide road outside the oak forest. There were some simple huts along the way, and some plants with magic power were planted nearby. These were the droll who lived in seclusion nearby. Many of the droll who traveled to the Eastern Kingdom would choose to live in this oak forest for a while. Through his god-level perception, Soren could sense a powerful aura faintly shrouding this place. There was at least one high-grade legendary tree shepherd living here. However, he should be living in seclusion in the depths of the oak forest. A force full of vitality came from the ground. The figure of an eagle appeared. The eagle circled in the sky and landed, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into an elven droll wearing an animal skin coat. Not far from the forest, there was a strong figure leaping out, followed by a few more figures. They stepped lightly on the tree trunk and jumped more than 10 meters away. This was a martial monk's lightness technique. It was similar to the legendary martial monk who could walk on water. These monks were protecting one of them. When they saw Soren passing by, they couldn't help but stare at him. After making sure that he was just a passing professional, they carefully protected the person behind them and entered the droll's house. The one in the middle of the monks was a young boy. He was holding a light golden box in his arms, and he looked a little nervous. The box was light golden. It was a wooden box, and the outside was not painted. The light golden color was the original color of the wood that made the box. Soren frowned slightly and murmured, "Golden oak." In this world, the wood with a golden color was not ordinary. Most of them were tainted with a trace of divinity. The golden oak was a sacred object to the droll, and it was a tree that contained great power. These monks had leaf-like emblems on their bodies. They were practitioners of the nature sect. The origin of the nature sect was difficult to trace, but this sect of monks was very influential in the Eastern Kingdom. There were rumors that they were the monks of the Church of the Father of the Oak. Many gods and churches would train monks internally because they could take on more important tasks than other professions and worlds. They had a natural tenacity, which made them suitable for some time-consuming tasks. Soren knew that the box made of golden oak was definitely something special, but he didn't want to pry too much into it. He was only here to travel, so it was better not to get involved. About a few minutes later, 3 tall elf droll walked out. They were different from the droll who had turned into an eagle in the sky. These droll were all wearing clothes woven from leaves. Their hair was very exuberant, looking like the roots of trees. They glanced at Soren and frowned. Then, they walked into Droll's room. This was a tree shepherd. Droll, who had undergone a special class advancement, could control all the plants in nature. In the forest domain, no one of the same class could defeat them. The tree shepherds were born with the plant domain. So many droll and monks have gathered. Something must have happened. Soren thought, but he still continued to move forward. According to the information he received, the latest news about the divine artifact was in a valley in front of him. There was a big scuffle there, and the person who took the divine artifact was nowhere to be found. Passing through the lush oak forest, Soren quickly approached the location of the valley. Before he got close to the valley, he found many traces of fighting with his superb tracking ability. There were hundreds of people fighting for the divine artifact. But it was not surprising. After all, it was a divine artifact. Even if he couldn't use it himself, he could still sell it for a fortune. The further he went, the more traces of fighting there were. Gradually, blood began to appear on the ground. The inside of the valley was not big, and there was a small artificial lake in the middle. Soren just arrived here and found that there were other people nearby. It seemed that they were also fighting for or looking for clues about the divine artifact. Tracking domain. Soren found a secluded corner and activated his tracking domain. As his divine power was consumed, some incomplete images began to appear in front of his eyes. They were all images formed by the traces in the valley. Gods had the ability to trace back time. If someone said the name of a god in their peak state, the god could use their divine power to know what happened in the past 24 hours. The power of the Grim Reaper was even stronger. As long as it was a place where someone died, they could see the scene of death. Not sure if it was part of the power of the death domain, Soren found that his tracking domain had been strengthened. What he saw was not just the traces left behind by fighting. All the traces related to death were combined by the tracking domain. What Soren saw in front of his eyes were the blurry images of many people before they died. For example, the traces on the left side were formed by a human whose chest was completely caved in. He was hit by something with great force, and his armor was instantly shattered. His whole body flew upside down and dragged a 3-meter-long trace on the ground. The images that Soren saw were all similar images. When all the images were combined together, it was someone holding a divine artifact and killing everyone. From Soren's point of view, the end of anyone who saw it was death. The traces that could form after images were all of the dead people. I didn't expect that the tracking domain could be combined with other domain powers. I really know too little about the gods. For the first time, Soren found that the domain could be used in this way. No wonder the other gods liked to improve their domain powers. All the traces pointed to the other end. The guy with the divine artifact should be a legendary profession. He was surrounded by hundreds of people, rushed out from the north of the valley, and then disappeared. However, for Soren, who had the tracking domain, this was not a problem at all because he had already locked onto the target's traces. With the tracking domain, Soren could determine the direction of the target's escape. It was only a matter of time before Soren caught up with the guy who took the divine artifact. It should be this way. Soren immediately set off for the north, but at this time, the demon avatar suddenly saw some pictures. Soren immediately tried his best to transfer to the demon avatar's side, and then found that the pugilist girl who signed a contract with his demon avatar last time was actually nearby. Her position was in the north, and at this moment, she was moving with a group of monks. She was also moving in the direction that Soren was tracking. It was a soul contract without reservation. Although the Fist Master girl named Cicada received part of the demon incarnation's power and was immune to fire damage, her body and mind were already under Soren's control. When necessary, he could even observe the outside world from her perspective. This kind of treatment was similar to that of a god's chosen one. The only difference was that Soren did not give her the power of divinity. Chapter 752. The surrounding scenery flew by quickly. Soren hurried along the traces of the clergy. Along the way, he encountered several places where battles had taken place, and he also saw some broken remnants. After such exploration, Soren also had a general understanding of the ability of his clergy after fusion. This should be a clergy ability similar to Death Replay. The god of death could directly notice any traces of death, but Soren could not do such a thing. The death he saw had to be judged with the assistance of the tracking clergy. The tracking clergy combined with a part of the power of the death domain, so he could see the moment before death through the combination of traces. Is this the ability of a god? I have been a god for so long, and now I have really touched the threshold of a god. The half-elf and rogue clergies were passive clergies. Neither of them actively increased Soren's ability by much. The tracking clergy he obtained from the god of the hunt, Malor, could barely be considered a combat clergy. Because of the changes brought by the death domain, Soren was full of curiosity about the powerful death clergy. On the other side, hundreds of kilometers away from Soren, there was a team of people moving. The leader was a legendary monk. There were many members in this team, but most of them were dressed like monks. There were only a necromancer and a puppeteer. Unlike the puppeteer Soren had seen before, this puppeteer controlled a large wooden puppet, and its strength seemed to be relatively ordinary. Next to him was the young girl Cicada, who was dressed in a tight suit. At this moment, the puppeteer looked like he wanted to please her, as if he wanted to gain the girl's favor. However, Cicada did not have a good impression of the puppeteer who was constantly trying to please her. From her frown from time to time, it could be seen that her patience was reaching its limit. Since the last adventure, Cicada's relationship with her original teammates had become a lot estranged. And after that incident, it was not suitable for Cicada to act with them anymore. So, with the idea of training herself, Cicada began to travel to the eastern countries to improve her strength. Originally, she thought that after signing a contract with a powerful demon, her future would be very bleak. She had thought that she would encounter something very shameful, but she never expected that nothing would happen. There were no depraved and evil rituals, no shameful incidents. It was as if she had been forgotten by that terrifying demon. Her life had not changed much, but her strength had increased even more rapidly. It was an indescribable feeling. Cicada realized that its understanding of combat techniques was becoming more and more astonishing, and it was no longer afraid of any flames. At least for now, the demon had only brought her benefits. Finally, the girl's patience was completely exhausted. She turned her head to glare at the puppet master beside her and snorted coldly. Shut up. The enemy we're facing this time is very dangerous. You should focus more on how to deal with the upcoming battle. The puppet master was speechless. He had originally planned to take out a few gadgets to please the girl, but he also quietly put them away. Behind him, his companions snickered. Because of her beautiful face and tall figure, Cicada had received a lot of attention when she first joined the team. The puppet master also wished that he could stick to her side all the time. However, this girl who had advanced into a fist master did not seem to be easy to get along with. Her attitude towards others was also very cold. This operation was arranged by the White Cloud sect. The appearance of the divine artifact had caused a lot of trouble, so the White Cloud sect had sent people to seal this divine artifact. Monks rarely used weapons, and it was not the first time that the White Cloud sect had sealed a divine artifact. The famous divine artifact, Exile, of the eastern countries had been sealed by the White Cloud sect. According to the White Cloud sect, this divine artifact that had appeared was very evil. It had a murderous aura, and ordinary people would be easily affected if they held it. Such a divine artifact should not be carried around by people, and should be sealed by them directly. However, all fist masters maintained a close relationship with the monastic sect. As an advanced fist master, Cicada was an orphan born in the monastic sect. Although she did not have as many commandments as the monks, she still had a lot of connections with the White Cloud sect. Some of the fist master's abilities had been trained by the White Cloud sect. The other reason why Cicada decided to help was that she wanted to master the legendary Moon Overcast style. The White Cloud sect was one of the strongest monastic sects in the eastern countries. Within the White Cloud sect, there were special techniques to cultivate the Moon Overcast style, Hard to See, and Shadow Trace. The martial monk sect was nothing more than skillful and fierce. As an advanced fist master, Cicada could not cultivate the diamond body, as a woman, so she walked the path of the ethereal body. This way, she could only choose between the Sun Overcast style and the Moon Overcast style. Unless she had a fortuitous encounter that allowed her to advance by leaps and bounds, only those with extraordinary talent could master the sun overcast style and moon overcast style at the same time. Cicada's goal was to build a good relationship with the White Cloud sect in hopes of entering the White Cloud sect to cultivate more deeply. Actually, the best place to cultivate the ethereal body was the nature sect. However, the martial monks of this sect only had a good relationship with the droll. Their relationship with the outside world was similar to the droll cult on the other side of the continent. It was hard to deal with. The group moved forward very quickly. This group already had people secretly following the guy with the divine weapon. They only needed to follow the traces left behind. However, for some reason, Cicada felt like she was being spied on. Moreover, this feeling was getting stronger and stronger. She had a feeling that something was about to happen. It was harder for martial monks to cultivate than other professions. This was because martial monks needed a lot of strength to use the penetrating force and the penetrating shock palm. They also needed enough agility to master the shadow step and the lightness technique. If one's physique was not enough, it would be very difficult to cultivate the ethereal body and diamond body. However, the most important attribute of a martial monk was the ability to sense. This was the key to determining whether a martial monk was strong enough. Instinctive dodging in battle was the core of a martial monk's ability to survive without wearing armor. The stronger the perception, the more amazing the martial monk's instinctive dodging would be. It would be better than other professions who mastered instinctive dodging. Cicada was the kind of girl who was born with outstanding perception. If she did not have the sixth sense, she would not have been able to advance to a fist master as an orphan. It was because the main attribute was perception that martial monks had a good relationship with the droll and the priest. The priest sensed the gods, the droll sensed nature, and the martial monk's perception was more used to understand their own body. The main attribute of these three professions was perception. Cicada was the kind of girl who was born with sixth sense. Otherwise, she would not have been able to cultivate to her current strength. It was because of the perception of the martial monk's own body that they could cultivate all kinds of supernatural abilities that were not spells. For example, covert force, penetrating force, lightness technique, and so on. The greatest difference between a warrior and a monk was the ability to sense the potential within one's own body, even though they were both training and cultivating the body. The combination of the two. The cultivation method of the sword saint was born. Note, the martial monk's main attribute is perception. Other important attributes include strength, agility, and physique. Like the paladins, they belong to the ranks of professions with high requirements. Chapter 753. The practice of the Eastern Kingdom had a profound influence on the melee professions. Not to mention the advanced profession, Blade Master, which was most influenced by the Eastern Kingdom. Many skills mastered by rogues were influenced by the Eastern Kingdom. For example, the training of instinctive dodging, the mastery of flexible movements, and the legendary rogue's top skill, Shadow Step. This ability was very similar to the monk's Shadow Step. When the legendary monk used Shadow Step, he could also jump through the shadows. The effect was roughly equivalent to the wizard's short-distance blink spell. If a melee profession could blink and teleport, the effect would be quite terrifying. Not to mention that the monk was famous for being good at super close combat. The profession's specialty was rapid strike. Once the distance was closed enough, even the rogue's reaction speed could not keep up. Night fell. The team that had been on the road for a day stopped temporarily. The traces left behind were suddenly cut off here. The leading monk had just sent the rangers out to look for traces. Forest patrollers were actually rangers. There were some differences in the names of professions in different places. In the southern part of the continent, rangers were more followers who served the gods. The Eastern Kingdom did not have much belief in gods. The rangers here were more like droll. Most of them were close to animals, nature, and helping lost travelers. The rangers would determine whether it was possible to comprehend magic according to their own perception ability. They were a group of people who were good at tracking. In the wilderness, only they could easily follow all kinds of clues. Cicada found a clean stone and sat cross-legged. The puppet master wanted to come over and chat with her again, but he immediately retreated after being glared at by the girl. The people in the team were busy, and soon a bonfire was raised. 2 warriors were itching to fight by the bonfire. Cicada lost interest after a few glances. For a master of boxing like her, the training skills of the warriors were too crude. They were completely focused on the control of the body and did not pay attention to their inner and spiritual strength at all. The vitality of the warriors was very tenacious. Their daily physical training made them all rough and thick, and their vitality was more than 2 or 3 times that of other professions. Cicada began to breathe, adjusting her state of mind with her heartbeat, and then sank into her inner perception. This was a type of meditation technique. The difference was that wizards used meditation to improve their spirit. Priests used meditation to feel the glory of the gods, Droll used meditation to feel the nature of the outside world, and monks used meditation to feel their inner self. Meditation required a foundation. Either intelligence or wisdom was sufficient, and it was very difficult for attributes below 12 points to enter the range of meditation. The outcome of the battle between the 2 warriors was quickly decided. The one who won seemed to be unsatisfied. He could not help but cast his gaze to the side of Cicada. There was a young man who was also sitting cross-legged. The only difference was that he was holding a straight blade in his hand. He was a sword saint. Sword saints rarely made a move because their attacks were too fierce. They didn't wear armor because they learned their fighting style from the monks, so their attacks were very similar to the monks who practiced the diamond body. The young man opened his eyes as if he had sensed the other party's gaze. Sword saints also needed to meditate, but they were more focused on the energy called chi, or in the ancient language, ki. Do you want to spar with me? The young sword saint slowly opened his eyes. After seeing the other party nod, he slowly stood up. Generally, those who could advance to sword saint had a strong will to fight. However, they also needed to learn self-restraint like the monks. Meditation like this was almost a daily routine for monks, sword saints, and fist masters. Cicada opened her eyes. This sword saint was an outsider like her. He was a traveler who assisted the White Cloud sect. She had not seen this sword saint in action, so she was quite curious about his strength. Even in the eastern countries, the proportion of people who could advance to sword saint was not many. As the young man slowly stood up, the warrior on the opposite side nervously gripped his weapon. The sword saint's attacks were notoriously ferocious, and the reason why he challenged him was because he wanted to understand this kind of power. For many warriors who encountered a bottleneck, the best way to advance to sword saint was to find a way to advance. Please. The young sword saint casually gripped his straight blade tightly and gestured to the nervous warrior in front of him. Sword saints were born with a certain aura. This aura was mostly due to the fact that they did not wear armor at all. When they fought, it was like dancing on the tip of a blade, unlike other melee professions who relied on armor to avoid damage. Clang! The expected exciting battle did not happen. The warrior on the opposite side only lasted for a few seconds before losing. There were a total of 3 moves. Horizontal slash. Horizontal slash. Chi slash. The sword saint probed with the first 2 moves. After the 3rd move, he found that the opponent was not his opponent at all. The chi slash directly knocked the warrior's weapon away. A professional who was preparing to enter the legendary realm like herself. Cicada quickly realized that this was a sword saint who was preparing to enter the legendary realm. He was probably working for the White Cloud sect to obtain some cultivation methods. Sword saints focused on the cultivation of chi. For monks, chi was their most basic thing. It was also the product of their internal self-perception. The young sword saint turned his gaze to Cicada. The people around clearly felt a fighting spirit. Perhaps for this sword saint, besides the leader of the legendary monks, only Cicada was worthy of fighting with him. So, Cicada stood up. As a girl who looked tall and slender, Cicada was much more dangerous than her appearance suggested. Please. Cicada put her hands together and made a gesture of invitation. She had been trained as a monk since she was a child. Fist Master was originally an extension of the monk's profession. The young sword saint narrowed his eyes slightly. In an instant, the sharp blade slashed directly at Cicada in front of him. The speed was faster than before. The sword saint did not use his full strength just now. Sword saints were known for their fast attack speed. Monks were the fastest when it came to bare-handed attacks. When it came to weapons, no one could be faster than a sword saint. In the face of the sword saint's fierce attack, Cicada dodged sideways as if she had expected it. With a low shout, she slapped out with her palm. Piercing shock palm. Clang. The sword saint, who did not wear armor, did not dare to take Cicada's attack head-on. In an instant, he blocked the opponent with the back of his sword. This palm clearly hit the back of the sword, but the young sword saint's body shook, and a trace of blood oozed from the corner of his mouth. Hidden power? Penetrating power? There was a burst of exclamation all around. This kind of skill could only be mastered by high-level monks. There were a large number of monks in the eastern countries, but many monks were not talented enough and were similar to ordinary warriors. They cultivated the skills of fast strikes and bare-handed attacks. Only those with better talent could learn the diamond body and ethereal body. The sword saint's eyes were obviously dignified. Cicada's bare-handed attack actually made the sound of metal colliding with the weapon. This ability was called Chi Strike. Cicada's hands were at least equivalent to grade 1 rare weapons. In other words, the girl in front of him, who looked weak, could already catch the attack of a rare weapon with her bare hands. Pugilist was more focused on the training of bare-handed attacks. Ordinary monks needed to be level 10 to be able to train their hands into rare weapons, and level 13 to be able to strengthen them into +2 rare weapons. However, Pugilist had the ability to increase one level every 2 professional levels. As a high-level professional, Cicada's hands were at least equivalent to +3 rare weapons. Unbelievable. A pair of white and slender girls' hands were actually similar to +3 rare weapons. Cicada did not stop attacking. After a short fight, her storm-like continuous skills had been launched, and the sword saint was almost instantly suppressed by the crazy attack frequency. This was because Cicada's ethereal body was not practiced to perfection. The real ethereal body was level 19, compared to diamond body, which required level was only 17. The sword saint began to retreat. Cicada did not give him any chance at all. It was a completely one-sided suppression. However, just after the sword saint was forced back 7 or 8 steps in a row, his eyes suddenly burst with a glimmer of light, and then he shouted to the girl in front of him, "Be careful." It was at this moment the situation instantly reversed. The sword saint's attack suddenly became incomparably ferocious. His straight blade had already turned into an afterimage. When he brandished his war blade, it even formed an invisible blade wind. The surrounding people who were too close to the sword saint felt the blade wind cutting them. Some people even had red marks on their skin. At that moment, outside the forest very close to them, Soren, who was hiding in the shadows and casually watching, also narrowed his eyes and muttered, "Whirlwind attack." It was the prerequisite battle technique of the whirlwind. Soren could also use this attack, and the sword saint in front of him could also use it. In terms of data, it meant that he had at least received a hint of the whirlwind. This sword saint had something up his sleeve. Soren suspected that the sword saint had received guidance from a legendary professional who had mastered the whirlwind, or that he himself had mastered the whirlwind technique. Soren had already received a hint of the whirlwind. If he had a proper training method, it was only a matter of time before he mastered the whirlwind technique. On the other side, after being forced back by the sword saint's attack, Cicada immediately retreated and said slowly, "I lost." The sword saint had obviously held back. Otherwise, the whirlwind attack would have been enough to kill her in an instant. It was simply too fast. She had misjudged. Not only did the sword saint want to enter the legendary realm, he had already touched the threshold of the legendary realm. A fist master against a sword saint. She had already lost when she lost the initiative. There was no need to continue fighting. Her companions looked at the Sword Saint with shock and admiration. Some even wanted to get close to him and see if they could learn some of the Sword Saint's techniques. At that moment, Cicada couldn't help but turn her head and look at the forest in the distance. She kept feeling that someone was spying on her. Night fell. The others were resting while waiting for the forest patrollers to return. Cicada also meditated again, but she still maintained her perception of the outside world. She looked like she was only 16 or 17 years old. But her real age was already 21 years old. Monks had a level 17 ability called Ageless Body. Usually, when a monk cultivated this ability, their body would stop aging. Although this wouldn't extend the monk's life, before they died of old age, they could ensure that their body wouldn't continue to age. Cicada's appearance was because of this ability. She walked the path of the ethereal body, so she came into contact with the ageless body early. Therefore, she had stopped aging when she was 16 or 17 years old. Although she still grew a lot taller, her face didn't change much. If she could go one step further, she could use the ageless body's ability to keep herself at her peak. Her body state would be maintained at around 20 years old until the day she died of old age. On the other side, Soren couldn't help but fall into deep thought. The technique that the Sword Saint used just now obviously used the energy of Ki. As a rogue, Soren didn't have this ability unless he was also a level 1 monk or Sword Saint. With Soren's current conditions, it was also possible for him to be a Sword Saint, but it would be very difficult to bear the slaughter EXP penalty. Because he was a wizard, Soren could also simulate a similar combat ability with the help of greater haste and divine power. Divine power was far beyond the power of ordinary things. If he could figure out the key, perhaps he could try to use other methods to master it. However, there was a more troublesome problem here. That was, Soren didn't know how to use the aura / at all. Even from a layman's point of view, it could be seen that the Sword Saint's explosion was completely done by relying on the aura / He needed to communicate with the Sword Saint. Moreover, Soren himself had also received information from the whirlwind, so perhaps both sides could gain something. The night was getting darker. Just as Soren was thinking about how to approach this group of people, there was a sudden disturbance in the distance. Immediately after, the legendary monk stood up, shouted at the others, and quickly rushed over. The others also set off to chase after him. It seemed that the scattered rangers had found something. Soren also quickly caught up. After passing through a forest, the monk immediately found a corpse. He took a look at it and suddenly frowned. Knowles. The one who died was the ranger he sent out. There were 2 high-level monks accompanying this ranger, but there were no corpses nearby. The chest of the deceased was torn open by a great force. It was a clear claw mark, and there were still gray hairs on the weapon of the deceased. It didn't look like a trace of a human. Let's go. I'm afraid our spies have been discovered. They are in danger now. The legendary monk took the lead and rushed out, followed by Cicada and the young Sword Saint. Soren also caught up a few minutes later. He looked at the traces around, frowned, and said, Abyss Knowles. The king of Knowles, Yinagu. This powerful lord of the abyss had been looking for the artifact, Flail of Time. Although he already had a +3 artifact Flail, he had never given up looking for a more powerful artifact, Flail of Time, for hundreds of years. The corpse was stained with the aura of the abyss. Ordinary people might not be able to feel it, but as a god, Soren could feel more. It was the Knowles from the abyss who did it. Moreover, it was a very dangerous high-level Knoll assassin. It might have been directly teleported from the bottomless abyss. P.S. 2 in 1. This volume is about to end. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.